it's grown, and I've always felt this was like one of the best things I've attended. So I want to thank you for that. So I didn't do a presentation. What I want to do is just, and Jim and I, we did not coordinate, but I'm going to just kind of follow up on a couple of things that Jim brought up and just kind of give more of a local, regional perspective, um, just to kind of explain and put it in maybe a different context. So I was going to talk a little bit about aviation fuel tax. I was going to talk a little bit about our noise forum that we've been participating in and just explain that. Some of you know about it, some of you don't know about it, but it may lead into your next session. And I want to talk about high-speed rail, California high-speed rail. So I apologize for the people not from California. The noise forum touches everybody, but the other topics are more California-centric, so I apologize for that. But I kind of want to give a little bit of a perspective on some of the things that we've been working on over the past year. And then I want to open up the floor and see what's on your mind with the time we have left. So I'm going to go through these relatively quick to provide some time for you to kind of speak, ask questions. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the aviation fuel sales tax, and I appreciate Jim giving the history and the background, so I don't have to do that. What I want to do is kind of piggyback off his comment that we're on it, the agency's on it. I know for some of you it's not going fast enough, but you know, when the agency put the clarification out, I mean, it's kind of you ask a question and then you start to get the answers, and then I mean it's a lot of work. It's a lot. So I'm gonna talk more specifically about California and just kind of give you kind of a timeline and a little bit of background on some of the things that's kind of taken place last year, 2019, going into now, to kind of put a little bit more context into kind of some of the things that Jim shared. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit. Some of you heard me talk about this in some of the other conferences I've been in, but there's some new stuff I'm going to bring up that you probably have not heard yet. So first of all, the department. So we're really appreciative. At least I am. This current administration we have in California, I believe, and this is me speaking, Mark McClarty, not necessarily FA. I do believe that their intent is to comply, and I didn't necessarily feel that way with the last administration. So the fact that they're asking questions or they're providing proposals that some of us may question, I think is a good thing, because at least they're doing it. And I think they're doing it because, yes, as you and I would do. I mean, they put their proposal together. A4A's kind of thrown out their proposal as to what they'd like to see happen with these fuel tax, sales taxes, revenue. And now we've got the letter from a consortium of people in California, so now we've got more of an airport perspective. So, you know, I mean, everybody should have an opinion, and that's fine, and that's helpful for us to know. And that's the way I kind of see it. But the fact that we're talking, to me, is a good sign, because we weren't talking as much with the last administration. So, in July 2019, Kelly Bosley, I believe that's her name, she's the director for California Department of Finance. She met with Kevin Willis, and I think we had Elizabeth Newman from Jim's staff in that meeting as well as a few other people up in DC, just to talk about, get some clarification on the fuel sales tax policy. And then they at that particular meeting, and I happened to be on by phone, they were really trying to get a sense of what type of offsets FA might be open to. So, I mean, the fact that they were looking for offsets, I don't think is a bad thing. I mean, that's their proposal. So we didn't really get into detail with them on that. We just gave some general information on the airport revenue policy, and told them if they want to propose something, then go ahead. Now, I made a statement in that meeting that at first they contested, but then later they said it's possible. And the statement I made had to do with the state funding, or the lack thereof in California, for California being such a big state, such an important state. When we met with the previous administration, and that's what John mentioned. John was involved, Dad, Sarah, Jim, Elizabeth from Jim's shop, Kevin Willis, Randy Fierce before then. We met with the previous administration. We were trying to get a sense of how much was being collected, and we were trying to get a sense of how they view the state's funding program. So we did like an informal comparison of all 50 states, and I did it by reaching out to my peers around the country just to kind of get a sense of what kind of state programs there were. Now, no one expected California to be as robust as Florida, but California was like in the bottom 10. So we shared that back in those days with the people that we talked to. So I made the comment that moving forward to this July meeting that we did this, and we can probably update it if we wanted to. But the fact is that you folks have to understand, and I'm speaking as a taxpayer now, so I guess I have an opinion. You know, what Aviation California means to you. Because right now, I mean, you're really underfunded. And I said if you're trying to maximize federal dollars, I can tell you right now, I don't pursue dollars in California, additional dollars, because we have a hard time with some of our sponsors being that they get local share, and the state's not contributing, and that's a fact. So if the goal is to try to maximize, the fact that you've underfunded this program is not helping that goal. And at first they contested it. They felt like they put a federal share towards every federal dollar, a state share towards every federal dollar. I said, no, you didn't. So I promised to get back to them on that, which I did, and I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. So I took an IOU to get back, do some research, find out how much state money has matched our federal money, just so we can have a conversation, a factual conversation. So anyway, that was July. August 30th, DOF sent a letter to Kevin Willis in his shop with their proposal. And just as we thought, you know, they were looking at trying to see if they can offset some of the funds with some transportation projects, surface transportation projects that they felt contributed to airports. We did a cursory review on it. And what we found in our cursory review was that, okay, there were some things that may have some potential. There were some things that was like a no. And there were some items that they put on there that required more information for us to really give it an analysis. So that was August. So you kind of moved to November. November is when I finally collected the data, and I had to go through a California Public Record Act to get it from Caltrans, because while we publish our AIP grants on the web, they don't publish what they do. So what I did was basically identify everything that we've given in the state of California between 2015 and 2019, all the federal AIP money, and by airport. And I sent it to them through the Public Records Act and said, tell me how much state money you put towards this. And then we can determine what your match was, if any. Because what we intuitively knew, but we didn't have facts on, was that some airports, especially the bigger ones, but some of the smaller ones too, they don't even go to Caltrans. They just go about it if they can fund it. And then we have others who can't fund it. And again, we get into this thing where we're not always optimizing the federal dollar. So I collected that data through the Public Records Act, and in general, what I found was that, and I sent this to Keely, was that for those 5 years, we provided about $1.3 billion of AIP in California. The state funding match was about $7.1 million, well under 10%. But we not only did that, but I gave her the analysis so she can see exactly how much match they provided to each project, and I provided some examples in my letter to show where there was zero match, where there was a 3% match, where there was a 5% match, different size airports in California. So so that was my IOU from that July meeting, was to kind of collect that data to get it to her so that we can just kind of establish kind of what's actually happening. And again, we looked at it from the context of we're diverting revenue. If your intent is to maximize federal dollars, which is what they told us, and if your intent is to match all federal AIP money, which they told us, you're not doing it. So I mean, this is no opinion. This is just fact. This is the data. So we sent that to them in November. So now you kind of move forward to now. We've got a meeting scheduled February 6th with DOF, and what we were waiting, we were still working with them, so there's been communication, so it's not like there hadn't been communications with Kevin Willis' shop and Keely. There has been. But part of the purpose for this meeting is to sit down with them, to go over their proposal, and we're doing a deeper dive to walk through their proposed offsets and kind of tell them, based on our deeper dive that we now have had time to do, what our disposition is. There's a couple other things too. They claimed about $50 million in fuel taxes. They didn't really substantiate how they got that number, so we need to get more factual information from them. So part of it's to let them know we need you to kind of back up your numbers so we can establish exactly how much is being diverted. At the July meeting, they weren't sure. At this time, they kind of gave us a number, but they didn't really give us any background. So part of it is to kind of talk through that, kind of what we need for that. The other part is to kind of walk through their proposal, their offsets, and kind of give a more realistic perspective on how we view it. Now, based on what I've seen, there's still a delta. And hopefully we can kind of put that on the table. But I see this as positive. I guess maybe I'm an eternal optimist. I see this as a positive step because we really can't get into a resolution until we all agree on the numbers and we all agree on what is still left over to get funded. And that's where some of the things we talked about in terms of state funding for things like PFAS, and I know that was in the letter that was sent up, some of the environmental regulatory things you're dealing with CARB with respect to zero emission vehicles, things like that would be something that we would find acceptable. Funding a more robust state program, whatever. So I think my perspective is, now that we're finally having this meeting, we can start really talking about numbers. They still have to back up the $50 million that they came up with, but we can still talk about numbers, and then we can start talking about resolution. I would tell you this. Some of you have heard me mention that we've heard the A4A's perspective. We know DOS. We were waiting to hear the airport's perspective because when we talk to you individually, everybody's got an opinion. So, but what's your opinion collectively? So I think that's going to be helpful. I think it was helpful to get the letter because now as Kevin Willis and this group starts getting into negotiations and discussions about how to resolve it, we got some places where it could be, what we can talk about once we figure out what that delta is. So I just wanted to just kind of mention that there are things going on. Prior to the February 6th letter, Kurt Schaefer asked Kevin Willis to send a letter to DOF, which is going to go out Monday, to make it really clear what our expectations is for the February 6th meeting. And that was partially a result of the letter that we got from you folks that correctly stated that this has been going on for a long time. So more to come on that, but I think, as Jim mentioned, there are things happening to try to get this to resolution. And I think now we've got pieces in place to really start having a conversation with them, a real conversation. So more to come on that. February 6th, I also want to tell you that in addition to going to that meeting with DOF, and I believe the Secretary of Transportation is going to be at that meeting, although I haven't seen their meeting list, but I heard that that person was going to be there as well. In addition to that, I've also got a meeting, and this is the first, I've been in this position since 2003. For the first time, I'm meeting with the Caltrans director, also on the 6th. Amy Choi and I have been talking. We've been really talking about how we can work close together. We've been having this conversation for years with previous people in her position. But there's some things happening that I think are going to make this a little bit more realistic. So she set up this meeting with her director. Last name Tokes, I don't remember his first name, but and part of it is going to be to just talk about the state program and the importance of aviation. I'm going to bring up the letter and kind of the funding and see if we can get some advocacy to some of this from DOT at the director level. So it's not just Caltrans. Get some attention to it. So I think that's going to be a positive as well, that we're going to have that meeting. So more to come on that too. Any questions on that real quick before I go into the noise forum and then high-speed rail? Then I'll just open up the floor. Okay, yes.
My name is Raja Sengupta. I teach at UC Berkeley. And I've worked on drones for about 20 years, right? And the reason I gave that background is, you said you're having a conversation with the director at Caltrans, right? So the drone stuff, the urban air mobility stuff is all low altitude flight, right? Berkeley has a deep research relationship with Caltrans. They give us millions of dollars every year. The Department of Aviation, though, has been entirely missing for 20 years. So I don't quite understand, like, why is this Department of Aviation so absent from low altitude flight stuff, or am I just one of these uninformed guys? Like, actually, there's a lot of stuff going on.
How many minutes is my presentation again? No, seriously. I mean, I don't want to get into to that because that's a state. But that's what we're talking about. We're there to talk about the importance of aviation in California and the importance of having a strong aeronautics division. And to be honest with you, you need, in my opinion, this is Mark McCleary speaking, not necessarily the FAA's opinion. You need strong leadership, and I think with Amy, we're getting good leadership, and they need funding. Yes.
Yeah.
Which hadn't always been in place.
My answer for that is that they don't have any money to participate. They have such a paltry amount in the Division of Aeronautics. They have like less than $8 million. Sometimes it's $6 million. And to follow on what Mark was saying, they have they have $89 million in the state of Florida in their aviation account. And I think we should be equal to Florida because we have many more people and we also have a huge tourism faction. So we're trying to get more money for them.
That discrepancy, I don't understand why. That just doesn't make sense.
My
right?
recommendation is that you invite someone from Caltrans who can speak to that because I can't really speak.
Yeah, the room is in agreement. Yes, Eddie, is it? Excuse me, burn. There you go, sorry.
Just I think in terms of the relationship with the folks in leadership at the state level, I think looking forward there's a great opportunity because of having David Kim, who's the current Secretary of Transportation, that Governor Newsom had recently appointed, actually came from Washington, D.C. and DOT and had been in California, and I think he'll be a greater advocate for aviation. And I know that Mark's supposed to meet with him. And just by way on the fuel tax, by way of background, it was actually at the time that I was associate administrator. And so then when we had issued it out, I remember having a conversation with Secretary Fox, and he was very much conscious about the fact of the impact to the local community. And that is why we gave that 2-year period of time to come up with a plan, because he came from local government. He was mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, and he knew and appreciated that there was other funds that were being used on the aviation fuel tax, but now sort of that time has come to roost to actually go ahead and get it done. So.
Sarah.
Go ahead, Mark. John.
Just one real quick thing before we get off the fuel tax issue. I just want to state that California Airports Council, working through Jim Lights and Sarah, have taken the lead, and we thank them for it.
Yeah, I agree.
And Sarah, sorry, Sarah. Let me come back to the back. Can you hand that?
I just wanted to chime in here really quick because we've been a part of the conversations that have been happening, at least within within the state legislature, and trying to figure out how to find a resolution to this issue. A lot of the jurisdictions in California are currently out of compliance with the cities or the counties, but this is really going to come down to the state action because there's currently no tracking system for aviation fuel. So there's no way to break those out from how you remit your taxes, and we really can't get a clear idea of how much of that money needs to go back to the airports. And I just say that now because Department of Finance, I think they're adding a line to their tax forms so that the suppliers can begin reporting the fuel sales that they're seeing at their facilities. But it's another issue that this really needs to be fixed through legislation because there are no enforcement mechanisms for them reporting that line item on the tax form. So it's really good faith that they're reporting accurate numbers or if they report at all. And we've talked to Department of Finance about this last year. We let them know this is inconsistent. How do we know if we're going to get correct numbers? But we're still going through this back and forth with Department of Finance. So I just say that to Mark as well, just so you know when you go into those meetings next month that we still have concerns about the numbers that they report out.
But I think you touched. Some of this is really the state. So there's what happened before that we're trying to account for, and then there's the future. And that the fact is that the state needs to do some regulatory or legislative fixes or remedies to get controls in place. Mm-hmm. So that's where you can help. This is more complicated than simply the FAA going in with a hammer and saying here and do this. There's structural issues that need to get fixed in California, and you can help with that. Okay, noise forum, real quick. So Jim mentioned Phoenix, and that was a good example, and some of the other noise matters that he's been working on with Metroplex and other issues with respect to opposition and litigation across the country. So one of the things, and some of you may be aware of this, some may not be aware of this, but one of the things that I think is really positive that's been taking place about a year ago. So I won't lift the hood up and get into kind of what the dynamics are, but I would just say this. Historically, there's always been kind of a disconnect between the airport community and sometimes in their engagement and then FAA and our engagement. So I think what Phoenix did, as well as some of this other litigation, is kind of forced everybody to kind of look, because we're all in this together, and we're all kind of getting burned together. So I have to give the person's name at the time was Kim Stover. At the time, she was the director for air traffic services up in Seattle. She reached out to myself and my counterpart in Northwest Mountain to see if we would be willing to bring some airports together with FAA, with air traffic, and the RAs to talk about what was going on and kind of see if we can kind of figure out how we can work together and communicate these messages together, because we're all getting burnt in the same manner. And I know there was a lot of skepticism at the time, because even while we were trying to bring everybody together, and it started with the large hub airports in Western Pacific and Northwest Mountain region, and it's kind of morphed into some of the small hubs, not all, but some of the small hubs been included. In fact, not the last one, but the one prior to the last one, we added places like Boise and Reno and Tucson and some other locations, Colorado Springs. So I know there was some skepticism, because while we were trying to figure out how to sit down and talk to each other and try to build trust, FAA, Office of Airports included, Air Traffic Organization, RAs, airports, while we were trying to figure that out, some of these procedures were still happening, which didn't really help for trust. While we're talking about working together, all of a sudden something gets posted. So what we discovered, one of the things that we discovered that I think has been really helpful, and I'm speaking more out west, I think the East Coast and others are looking at this model. One of the things that kind of came from this is what's called the gateway, IFP gateway, Instrument Flight Procedure Gateway. Air traffic mentioned they had 40,000 requests in for procedural changes. And some of them came from airlines, some came from tenants, some came from airports, some came from them. And they really didn't have a mechanism for trying to prioritize them. And that was part of the disconnect. They were doing what they're supposed to do, and they're processing these things as they saw it in terms of their priority. But the disconnect, again, was the airport community also being in that loophole. And one of the things that was done was for each of the airports in our forum, air traffic sat down, walked them through the things that were in place to try to get some feedback as to what they thought the priorities were. The premise was the local airport knew that if you go in this area, it may stop everything. We can probably sell this area, and that kind of conversation wasn't really being considered. Now, we had to bring the airports to the table too, because I understand the airport side. We don't want to sign up for something that that our community may not be behind, and we don't want to have our face on it, but we don't mind helping out. So we had to kind of figure out a way to have a conversation without overly formalizing it. And we agreed to looking for an 80% solution, because the reality is that there's going to be times when the FAA needs to do it for safety. There's also going to be times when the airport are going to oppose it because they have to. So we said, let's look at an 80% solution where we can kind of agree on 80% of how we're going to work together. And we're having next month we're going to have, I believe, we do it quarterly. I think we'll have our 8th or 9th meeting. And it's been going really good, in my opinion. And I think the airports who are a part of this also would agree, because again, we're learning to trust, we're learning to listen. We're talking about how do we message together. We're talking about, how do we fix some of these systemic things that are happening, and it's building trust. So I just want to kind of say that, because again, when Jim mentioned about the outreach, and kind of the unique thing about being in the field, you know, we kind of want to make sure whatever we do is consistent with what the folks in DC are proposing or doing. So, you know, there are some DC people in this committee as well, this forum as well. But you know, we get a chance to sit down with each of you and try to figure out, okay, how do we make this work? And we weren't doing that back in the Phoenix days. So I think, even though it's ugly, even though there's litigation involved, I think there's a potential for something good to come out of it. And again, that's why I say I'm always an optimist about this. So any questions on that before I go to high-speed rail? Then I'll open up the floor to you folks for anything else. All right, cool.
To go.
California high-speed rail. What can I say? So maybe a couple months ago, some people from the high-speed rail authority wanted to meet with me. So they came by, and it took me a while to figure out exactly what it was they wanted. So what they wanted to talk about was Burbank Airport. And at the time, I didn't know because we looked on their website before they came to prep, and we saw the routing from going from San Francisco to Anaheim. That's the route they were looking at. And we were like, okay, let's see what they got to say. Well, actually, they have a proposal to go underneath the runway, one of the runways at Burbank, the tunnel underneath it. And I guess they thought they can come in there and talk about us becoming a cooperating agency, because apparently the Department of Rail Administration, Federal Rail Administration, delegated the EIS to the state, to this group, this organization that's appointed by the governor. So we checked that out, and it was true, because that typically doesn't happen. So this was their coordination with us, and I guess, again, bringing us in as a cooperating agency, they wanted us to be involved because they were looking at going under Burbank. And of course, my question is, have you talked to the folks at Burbank? And of course they said, yeah. And of course we checked with the people at Burbank later, and of course they were like, well, that's not what they talked about. So anyway, make a long story short, as we start to realize kind of what they were asking for, I asked a question, and then I always get, you know, we got this 3-question rule. You ask somebody a question, simple questions. If they can't answer, you know to dive in, okay? Well, I asked a couple of questions, and what it resulted in was saying, can you show me your route? Because it's not as simple as just, again, I represent the Office of Airports. We can certainly be a cooperating agency for things that affect airports, but the route also goes into the Central Valley, and there's other FAA facilities out there, or potentially out there. So we don't know the impact of that, so we have to bring air traffic in, yada, yada, yada. So it went from saying, okay, the line going from San Francisco, downtown San Francisco to San Jose, follows the current Caltrain line. The difference is that they're going to electrify it. In fact, they're going to electrify all the Caltrain trains. So, you know, again, I don't know if it's an issue. They felt like by doing the 7460 process, that was their coordination. And I said, no, there's more to it than just that. I said, we're going to have to look at those lines. It may not be a problem, but if you want us to give you an answer, right now, the train it's in the RPZ. That's not a problem, but when you electrify them, I'm not sure what that's going to do to equipment out there. And if you're going to do it for all the air trains, we have to look at that. And then we looked at something at Fullerton, and they said they were going to tunnel. Actually, it was going to be outside the RPZ, so we started asking about height. And of course, they didn't have any design considerations. They haven't gotten that far. But they were looking for like an approval because they're under a rush, a big push to get this done. So where this is kind of morphed to is we've passed it on to our regional administrator, with Carol Gervin, to kind of pull an FA team together. And since Burbank's an area of interest, we want to bring the sponsor in as well. But our position is that we want to sit back and try to figure out exactly what questions we want to ask, so we can go on record saying these are things that we need to look at, and at this level of detail for us to do an analysis. Which of course they're not going to like, because they've already, the way they're doing environmental, we would never do an environmental this way. They said, well, we're done with 1/3 of it already. Well, okay, so we wouldn't segment it that way. But we want to go on record as a federal agency on the things that we are interested in seeing, so we can do the proper analysis and the level of detail we need to get. And in the case of Burbank, we want the airport authority at that meeting when we talk about Burbank, because it's like, well, did you get permission to even go into their property? Do they understand that if to shut down this runway, it's not like they have any noise issues around Burbank, okay? But you're going to have all operations on the north-south runway. Do you understand that? So, of course, no. So I guess my comment to you is that if you have an airport near the route, and you can look on the route, even though we saw that they made some changes off their website, but generally speaking, if you go on their website and look at their route, if you got an airport near it, you might want to pay special attention to kind of what's being proposed and if it's going to affect any nav aids or any future plans that you have, because I don't think they're thinking that through, and I think they were thinking if they do the 7460 and FA says it's okay, clear sailing. So that's my appeal to you. Any comments on that? Any questions? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mark, I did see an announcement on Wednesday, I believe, that they're going to stop the electrification right now and just worry about building it. So they have, I would guess partly your meeting has something to do with that, because they've decided now they're better off just to build an extension on what they've got and do that and not worry about any electrification.
See, I hadn't heard. Last thing I heard, they met with Caltrans and said they were going to do eminent domain to get the property at Burbank. That's the last I heard. But okay, I appreciate it. I appreciate hearing that. So my point is, I mean, it's going to take some time to kind of right-size this. But if you've got something there, you just pay attention. It'd be interesting to see how it's going to work if they're not going to electrify it. So more to come, I'm sure.
Just delay if
Yeah.
they're not doing it right up front.
Okay. Well, I just want to kind of give those updates, but I guess I just want to open the floor to see if there's anything that you have with the time I have remaining, if I have any time remaining.
Sure. Let's take a few questions. We're a little ahead of schedule in terms of the day. So, Mark, yeah.
This is just a completely heartless plug. But to go along with what Mark was saying, on the 25th of next month is California Aviation Day and Aerospace in Sacramento, and literally the purpose of that day is to march on the Capitol with airport and friends of airports to tell the legislature members what some of the issues are, and the main issue has been the fuel tax now for several years. So if you have the opportunity, please come to the Capitol that day and help out. It really makes a difference, and they really do listen to what we say. So please show up. It starts around 10 o'clock in the afternoon in the Capitol steps, and it ends about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's maybe half a day or a whole day if you have to travel, but it's well worth it. Please come if you can.
The 26th. And I think we have a slide somewhere. You may not be able to find it right now, but there is a slide that somebody provided that has information on it. Other questions, comments? Oh, come on. I know you want to talk to Mark. No, not just a second, Raj. Let me get a couple of the airport folks first.
I just had a question about, if it's an electrified train or, diesel-powered train, how does that affect nav aids? Is that what would affect nav aids, or just where the routing of the train is going?
Yeah, so I've got a philosophy. You validate everything before you say it's okay. I know we know there's been cases like around the country, like for wind farms and sometimes electrification, sometimes wires, where it's affected certain types of nav aids out there. So I think we just have to do the analysis and let the right people in our Spectrum organization and Tech Ops do the analysis and just validate it's not going to affect it. So my presumption is that it could. I'm not saying it will, but we need to look at it. So when I sit out, I try to get them to disclose exactly what they're going to do at the level of detail that our folks need to look at. And if they dismiss it, we're done with it. But what we don't want to do is what we've had happen at other parts of the country before, where someone builds something, and who would have thought that wind farms around Palm Springs would affect the airport? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Would it just be the track that's electrified, or how does that work, or have they not disclosed that yet?
Well, they just felt like if they did a 74, so we didn't even know they were doing electrification until we had a conversation with them. They just did a 7480, 7460. I'm not sure what they put out there. And then they told me that they work with the FAA, and I said, who did you work with? with Doug Pomeroy. I'm like, well, he's my environmental person. That's not the FAA. So again, I don't know what they actually looked at, but when they do these 74s, 60s, especially when it's off airport, if no one's looking at it really close and actually know what they're looking at, it's easy to kind of dismiss it if they represent something that's not what it really is. So in the course of us having a conversation, that came up. The other thing that came up on Burbank was, first they said, we're going to tunnel. We said, how are you going to tunnel? And could you give us the information on how you're going to do it? No, we only have 15% of the plans. Then it went from tunneling to cut and cover like they did at LAX. But that's different than tunneling under. So again, when we started asking questions, then they didn't really want to talk to us. So that's why we want to make sure we just go on record on what level of detail we need, so that we're trying to support this, but it needs to be done in a way where it's not going to be impactful to aviation.
Thanks. Bill.
I have a question about an opinion from you, maybe, on Caltrans' aviation department and its lack of status, really, or its strength. I've never been understood why in one of the largest state in the country, why we got such a little aviation department. Is A4A opposed to any strengthening the state aviation department under Caltrans? Do they have a motive here?
I've never heard, maybe Jim, I've never heard that they had a problem with that. I think they just want to make sure that revenues from this fuel sales tax goes into the airfield so that it helps their bottom line. So I'm not aware of that
Okay.
being an issue.
They oppose a lot of things that we're in favor of, so I just thought I'd ask.
Eddie, you want to?
I think the aviation fuel tax issue is one of those issues in terms of a coalition building is one that everybody can agree upon. A4A, IOPA, all the alphabet soups, NATA, they actually would like to have us have a greater role as airports in that advocacy. A lot of the airports actually, unfortunately, is not. And for whatever reason, with respect to making sure that some of this money is being siphoned off or to the benefit of other, sort of public works issues that they have. But it is one of those issues that I think we can all agree on that we need to kind of fight for and having a greater role. Mark, I do have one question. You talked about the contribution of the state in terms of matching for AIP. You did all that work. Mm-hmm. In your ideal world, what would that look like in terms of what would the state put in and what would the local government put in? Because often, the local government, they look at us and they say, we have plenty of money. We're the cash cow locally. We don't need any state money for your sort of, construction improvement projects. When you did that exercise, where were you going with that?
Well, in many states outside of California in the country, the state does a 10%, a 50% state match. So that's one program they have. They also have, some of them have a loan program. Some of them have their own state local program where they provide their own funds, maybe at a different percent than FAA's funds. So when you look at the more robust places, then especially like Florida, Florida's way out there. There's more state money being provided in Florida than federal money, AIP money, for the airports in Florida. So I don't know if that answers your question, but a lot of them, what they're doing here, they're not even matching the federal grant, which they said they were doing. And I believe that's their intent, and I'm hoping that gets corrected as part of this discussion. I mean, they should be able to do that if that's their intent. At least do the 50% match of the state. So if we do 90%, for example, then they would do 5, and then local would do 5.
You want?
Okay.
I was just going to speak to your question real quick about A4A. Right now, the Division of Aeronautics is funded only by a couple of taxes on non-commercial aircraft fuel. There has been talk, if the commercial jet fuel fuel tax money actually gets to airports at any point, about using some of that to further support the Division of Aeronautics. A4A hates that idea because they don't care anything about GA, nor do they care about non or small hubs. They really want that money, and they in fact tried to see to it that that money was only spent at the facilities that they use the most. And thankfully, that has not been a prevailing thought within our legislature to this point.
Okay, yeah, so I hadn't heard that, so thanks.
Carol, just we're now coming up, so real quick, yeah.
So when I go with others on Aviation Day to talk to all the legislators in the state of California, and I get to talk to an aide or someone, they're shocked that we have so little money in the Division of Aeronautics. So I think it's possible that we could have individual legislators helping us in our effort to get more money for the Division of Aeronautics.
Okay. Well, I don't, if you'd like to see that letter I sent, and it had the breakdown of everything that was done for those years, I can get it to SWAHI and they can make it available to you.
Sounds good. Okay. Real quick.
Yeah, if I can, so one of the things that I wonder about hearing this, because, you know, like the drone meetings and things that I go to, I see these Silicon Valley companies like Google and Amazon and all that, like, you know, they like lobby for federal regulation only. So I think they would like, it seems to me that they would like, you know, state departments, local aviation departments to be relatively weak. So they don't have to contend, because if these departments develop budgets, they'll also develop regulations. So I wonder if that's kind of a player in this whole landscape.
I'll let Carol answer that one.
Yeah. And then lunch, I promise. Sorry. There you go.
No, because they have no jurisdiction. The FAA has jurisdiction over the airports, not the state. I mean, the state has some regulations, but the FAA is the one that's giving the 90% grants, the Airport Improvement Program grants, and so the state gives a match with the local government giving a match. So it's really the FAA that has the most jurisdiction.
If you pay 90%, then you have jurisdiction. But in my common sense understanding, if you pay money, if somebody pays 50% of the costs, they'll have jurisdiction too.
Well, we like to use the word grant assurances and not jurisdiction.
Right.
Jurisdiction means something a little bit more
Something
than what
else.
we're talking about.
Okay. Okay, with that, I think Mark will be around, but thank you very much for a very informative update.